even some say demons. That was a concern in those days, that the body could be susceptible to demons in that period. Late in the 19th century, commercial funeral homes took over the responsibility for most of the preparations and care of the body. Jewish funeral homes, especially in cities, and their staff performed the traditional rituals. In the 1960s or 70s, congregations again started to reaffirm the responsibility of taking care of death and mourners. It was about 1980 when Rabbi Myron Kinberg of blessed memory, our rabbi for many years, worked with a group of interested community members to train and set up our own Chevra Kadisha, creating a manual and a procedure appropriate with our community. And I will let Joan give more details, for she was very, very much involved from the very beginning. Joan will elaborate. We ended up with a manual for our own Tahara manual for our own. Tahara is the ritual washing and dressing and preparation of the body for burial. And Joan, that's another thing Joan will talk about a little bit in detail. And Joan will also elaborate on Treasure Each Day. This group created a manual which you have out there, and everyone might want to take a copy of it. It's a wonderful guide to the rituals of death and dying. And Joan was very, very much involved in the writing and the editing of that manual. Another project of the Chevra Kadisha in those days was to put together a questionnaire. That's also out there. You might have it. It's my personal wishes concerning end-of-life choices. I recommend you look at it. It's a wonderful document for just organizing oneself mentally and so forth for the end of life. One last item before I turn this over to Joan, I would like to talk about is a program that we have at Temple Beth Israel, part of the Chevra Kadisha, of funeral coordinators. As I said before, Joan and I are funeral coordinators, as is Judith. Judith's another funeral coordinator, and Oriana. Oh, no, she's not. That's right. She's in the Chevra Kadisha, though, Judy. Same. Yeah, okay. This was a wonderful idea of Rabbi Yitzhak Husbands Hankin, Rabbi Cantor Yitzhak Husbands Hankin, our beloved emeritus rabbi in Cantor. With the rapid growth of size of our congregation, Rabbi Husbands Hankin found there wasn't time to both take care of all of the practical details when death occurs, in addition to the pastoral and liturgical duties. All of this on top of the regular weekly duties of the rabbi. And he had the idea, his solution was to have a small group of trained volunteer funeral coordinators to assist with much of the practical details and logistics. And this system is something that we have in place today, and I think it works, it really does work extremely well. It's very, very useful. We get a lot of very good feedback about it. It is probably unique to our community, although the idea might have spread to other communities around the country. So I'd like to turn this over to Joan now, and she will go into some of these things I've mentioned in greater detail. And I would like to, before I start, to say that Joan and her husband, Erwin, Joan Bayless and Erwin Naparstek, they helped to form the backbone of our Chevra Kadisha for many years, including co-chairs of the Chevra Kadisha committee. We were fortunate to have Joan here tonight, this evening, because of her deep knowledge and experience. I should also add that this is only one of the many areas where Joan's contributions have been extraordinary. For this and for a lot more, Joan, we thank you.
I thank you, Gary. Thank you very much for that generous introduction. So the first thing I want to say is that there's lots and lots of tradition that we have inherited, but this is not halakha, this is not Jewish law. There is no Jewish law that if you don't do it this way, you're breaking in the course of, except possibly for burying on Shabbat. That would be the only thing that would contravene Jewish law. Judith, is there a place I can stand where you'll see? Just move over one seat and then you can see. So that's very important to understand. We're dealing with opinions and inherited notions of what is correct, but there is no authoritative Jewish law that governs these choices. I think that's pretty important because we are very flexible and we feel the freedom to do that partially for that reason, or at least the rabbis have allowed us to do that for that reason. So basically, at the time that someone dies, if you aren't very, very experienced, if you haven't already lost a relative or a close friend, a loved one, you basically may find that you don't know what to do. And so our job as Chevra Kadisha, our job as Temple Beth Israel, is to help educate people as to what are their options. We don't educate you as to what is the only correct thing to do, because as I've said, there is no rule. It's really, there are customs that are very old that a lot of people think are probably law, but they're not actually law. So I think that's very important to understand. So you have to make all kinds of choices right up. The first thing you do is you call the synagogue. If someone close to you dies, the first thing you do is you call the basic temple number, and there will be an option for pastoral emergencies. You hit that one, and then you leave your message, and as soon as possible, someone will get back to you. Either whoever it is who's monitoring that line, there's someone monitoring that phone line all the time, so that it could be, you could hear back quickly, or it might be an hour or so, but it would probably not be overnight wait for a response. It might be the rabbi, it might be someone else. But that's very important because once we know that you have had a loss, then we jump into action to support you in a number of ways. And the first thing you have to do is sit down with a funeral coordinator who Gary described, a trained volunteer. We have someone on call every day of the year as a funeral coordinator, so there will always be someone available to walk you through this process. If you're very familiar, then they'll simply support you as you go through what you have already thought about and planned. If you're buffaloed and have no idea what to do, they can educate you as to the options. Also, reading Treasure Each Day now, before you're in crisis, is a very good thing to do because it outlines a lot of things and you can think about them ahead of time. And here are the choices you have to make. You might want to have a funeral. Many people do. And in Jewish tradition, custom indicates that that is followed by a burial. Sometimes people don't have a funeral because it may entail either more expense than the family can handle, renting a space for a funeral, or it might just be that what is wanted is the greatest simplicity, and what is very common is a graveside service which includes the funeral liturgy as well as immediate burial, because you're right there, and it's quite tidy, it's done and dusted. And the other possibility is a memorial service after. If a relative or a friend has died elsewhere and you're very moved, you want to have a memorial service that can usually be arranged for you at some remove from the immediate, because that's something that happened elsewhere. And at the moment, we offer that as well. Our rabbi offers that as well, following a cremation. Cremation was something that was not done when I was growing up by Jews, and it has become increasingly common in liberal Jewish communities for many reasons. Expense is certainly one of them. You don't have to buy real estate. And also the simplicity and efficiency of the process. It's not Jewish tradition. You may have someone tell you, Jews don't do that. But in fact, many Jews do. And in this congregation, the rabbi will do a memorial service following a cremation, but not a funeral prior. But there are lay leaders who will do whatever is needed by the family, because our mandate is to serve the people in their time of need and not to start legislating what they can and cannot do, up to a point. We do not bury on Shabbat. We do not have any funeral or memorial or even Shiva, nothing like that on Shabbat. So that's the one exception to our generally liberal and generous elasticity. Okay, so things that people can have to consider. An obituary. I would recommend, if you are very close to someone who is in a process of dying, and sometimes that can be over years or months, but you might want to start thinking about an obituary. You might ask them, if they're conscious and able to communicate, what they would like in their obituary, or you might just want to write from your own heart. I wrote my mother's obituary in a dark night of the soul, just a couple of nights before she died, and it was good, because I was really in the space. One thing to include in the obituary, a couple of things, would be obviously all the details of where and when, but also recommend no flowers. That's, again, not Jewish law, but it's Jewish custom, and it has to do with how we approach death in our tradition. Before I forget it, I'm going to say the other one is tzedakah, the giving of charity in memory of. And the reason we don't do flowers is that when Jews do death, we do it very realistically, because we don't have a theology that says, once you're dead, you're going to go to heaven and everything's going to be great. We have a philosophy that says someone has died and there's a hole that they left behind, and we miss them. And we focus on the person that was, not any, we don't presume to know what happens after we die. It's not given to us to know that. And the tzedakah is, frequently in an obituary for a Jewish person, you'll see the line, in lieu of flowers, please make donations may be made to, and then one or two charities. That's the way you honor memory in Judaism, is by doing a righteous act. You have to consider who is going to lead your service. It may be the rabbi, if the rabbi is available. It may be an on-call rabbi who would have been chosen by our rabbi and would be very good, or they wouldn't have been chosen by our rabbi, but maybe someone you don't know. Or it could be anyone. You don't actually need a rabbi to do a funeral, or a wedding, by the way. You just need an educated Jew who knows how. And we have a whole list of those people available. You have to consider which funeral home. We have one that we work with very closely that we have a lot of respect for, and they respect us, and that's formerly known as Musgroves, and it's now out on, what's it called? Danabo Road, and it's West Lawn Cemetery. We have a Jewish section there now, and these people know us by now. They know what our needs are. They know the do's and don'ts of dealing with Jews around death, and they're wonderful, but they are a funeral home. They are expensive, and if that isn't something that is in your plan, then there are other options, but we do recommend that. It can be very helpful because they will come and take the body from wherever it is when the person dies, hospital, home, street corner, and they transport it, and they will store it, and they have made it available to us to do this ritual Gary referred to, tahara, which is a very beautiful farewell to the body and the life that had animated the body. I will tell you that my husband, Erwin, joined the Chevra Kadisha before I did, and he brought home the manual that we were using. Now, all credit to Libby Botero, who did huge amount of research in those days as to what was the ritual, what were the prayers, what was said. But she, I think, was asking quite traditional, and maybe nobody had thought of this before, but I looked at this liturgy. 10,000 warriors will protect you from the fires of Gehenna, and you'll be saved from all your sins, and this really heavy stuff that didn't accord with our contemporary notion of what death means and what people are. And so we rewrote it. And boy, did we rewrite. I basically said to him, over my dead body, are they saying these words? And then, oops, wait a minute, no, they're not. And so we rewrote a very beautiful ritual that some of you in this room have, well, one of you anyway for sure, has used in the Tahara. And it is basically thanking the body for carrying the life that was. I won't go into a lot of detail about things that were wrong with the old one, and because it's very beautiful and very old-fashioned and sometimes striking kind of strange notes in our 21st century headspace about death. Okay, so that's a real beautiful thing, and that's something that's done at the funeral home prior to and at the end of the Tahara, the dress, the then washed and lovingly blessed dressed mate, which is the Hebrew word for the dead, is placed in the casket, and then it's ready to go to the funeral or to the graveside, but to the grave ultimately. You need to choose a coffin. Traditional Jewish coffins are absolutely plain, supposedly with no metal in them, because the temple was made without metal, and because it's supposed to completely decompose. The goal is dust to dust. And so that these elaborate lead-lined live eternally in this box coffins are not part of what we do. We are very realistic about death. We don't pretty it up. It's real, it's stark, it's painful, but that's what it is. Okay, so you choose a coffin. If you need a minyan, if you don't have 10 Jewish relatives or friends who will be with you, or 9 actually, because you'll be there, and the rabbi 8. But if you cannot make a Jewish minyan for this burial, it is a very, very simple matter of your funeral coordinator calling down a list we have of wonderful volunteers who will show up for you. And the other thing that is a beautiful thing to do, and that's very, very important, is called the meal of consolation. And on returning from the burial to wherever you're going to go back to, your home or a friend's home, whatever, there are people who have been there during the funeral getting a meal ready. It's called the meal of consolation, and having experienced it myself when I lost my parents, it was a wonderful thing, and it's a gift. Because one thing one generally is not doing is thinking about your own needs at this time. You're really focused on your feelings more than anything else. So that's a really beautiful thing. Okay, I think I'm going to move on to talk about Tahara specifically. I sort of did, but we have a very wonderful group of people. Men wash and dress the bodies of men. Women wash and dress the bodies of women. Of course, what the rabbis say in their infinite wisdom is that a woman, if you don't have enough people to do a tahara for a woman, you're out of luck, because you cannot possibly, God forbid, have a man doing that. That's not necessarily what we believe, but that's the custom. And the reverse is that women are not unable to control themselves like men in Orthodox thought, and therefore they are perfectly okay to be involved in, if necessary, in the tahara for a man. It's a little bit of hangover from the Orthodox view of women and men. Okay, but it's a really important ritual, tahara, but not everybody wants it. Generally, people are placed in one of our handmade, TBI-made shrouds, which are absolutely plain muslin, linen. Okay, I got a question here already I'll deal with in a second. And these, it makes everybody equal. That's another very important value in Judaism about death, is that we don't pretty it up. We don't have golden caskets. We don't have people buried in their finery, because what we're saying is in death, everybody's the same. There are no rich and poor in the so-called afterlife. It is an absolute equalizer, and we try to have the same respect shown to every single person that we come to take care of. There's no class system in the world to come, if there is a world to come. But you know what I mean. I'm using that old phrase ill-advisedly, probably. But question here, dust to dust does mean generally Jews do not embalm. Nobody's going to shoot you if you have a need to do that, but it is not part of our approach, because what we are encouraging is the return to the earth. And that's important. And another question was, is family present during the tahara? Generally not, but it's not forbidden. We have had family participate from time to time because they wanted to, they needed to. And it can be very beautiful and very healing if you can handle it. Not everybody can. You're not required. In fact, it's not customary to do so. It's something that, first of all, Chevra Kadisha means the holy society. It is considered a tremendous mitzvah, and normally good Jews, unlike us, would not tell you they're on the Chevra Kadisha, because that sounds almost boastful, because it is such a high mitzvah to do something like this, because you're doing a kindness for someone who cannot thank you, who cannot return the favor. It's considered a very high mitzvah. And so it's important to understand that this is a gift. And when you're so needy at a time when you've lost someone very close to you, it is wonderful to have that support of well-intentioned people who are calm about what they're doing because they have seen it before and there for you. It's a really nice thing. Is the family present? Generally not, but it's not, and it may be hard, but the ritual is beautiful. You've probably seen your loved one in their physical state of almost being dead before. It's not all that different. But we don't encourage it necessarily, but we will certainly allow it. And those who have done it, participated, have been very happy about that. Okay, there's another ritual, Shmirah, that Gary alluded to earlier, which goes way back. A lot of the customs and beliefs that we have around death go all the way back to the Middle Ages, when we were tremendously influenced by Christianity, actually, during that period. And that's why, and also the medieval fear of demons. That was the other big thing. So there are all kinds of ideas that the sons of a person, of a man being buried, are in danger from being attacked by demons at the time of the death. And the demons are actually representations of, this is really weird, but of all the potential babies that weren't born when that one sperm hit the egg and fertilized and became that son, but all the others are the demons. And this is not real, and we don't think about this today, but this is the origin of some of these ideas of guarding the body and protecting the body. And a person doing Shmirah would be reciting psalms, maybe for 24 hours until the burial. And in some cases in our world, where we have families thousands of miles away who may take days to be able to arrive, it could go on and on and on. We don't actually offer that anymore because Gary explained last week that the funeral homes have barriers to that. You're not actually sitting with the body. You might be sitting in a room that has refrigerators, drawers all around you, and one of those has that body. And some of us have encouraged people to try to do this in their heart, that you think of the person, you send them love, you visualize them and their life and all the good things. And if you want, you can read Psalms, because that is the tradition, or you can simply send light and love from yourself to this being who is in transition, maybe. We don't know anything about this, what happens after we die. So what I'm saying is a quotation of what someone else might have said, a supposition. There's no real hard information. But anyway, we can't really do it in a real way. In a big city where there's a Jewish funeral home, there'll be some, scholar, some young student who will get paid to sit and recite psalms. And some people really like that. I actually did have that done for my father because my father had been so afraid of death. And I thought that if there was any of him still hanging around, it might be comforting for him to have that. Depends on who you're talking about, okay? And then the next issue is Shiva. After the funeral, after you come home and have a meal of consolation, that first night after the burial is the first night of Shiva. And Shiva is a week generally, 7 nights of, 7 days. And in some communities you have 2 or 3 services a day. People will come and in the morning and sometimes in the afternoon and then in the evening to do the daily service, and that allows you, there's a moment at the end of the daily service to say the mourner's Kaddish, and the whole service is there to support the mourner being able to say the Kaddish. You have to make some decisions. Do you want to do Shiva? Do you not want to do Shiva? If you want to do Shiva, how many nights? Not everybody today does. It's not actually 7 nights because you never do it on Erev Shabbat, on Friday night. So it would automatically, the week would be minus that night. But you may just want to have 1 night or 3 nights or none. And that's entirely up to you. Where do you want to do it? Generally, it's done in the home of the deceased, but that sometimes the deceased doesn't have a home anymore. They've been in a hospital or a nursing home or somewhere, and the relatives come from elsewhere, so it would have to be in someone else's home or even possibly in the synagogue, in a room somewhere, probably not this huge room. But those decisions are all, at the time, and with the help of the funeral coordinator and the rabbi, you think these things through, or you think it through ahead of time if you actually know where your feelings are. Yes, I want the whole 9 yards. No, I don't want to ask my family to stay that long. No, I can't handle that many days. Whatever. You're free to make those choices. Someone will be leading that service, and that someone is either going to be the rabbi or one of our volunteer lay leaders who can come and do that. We bring special prayer books to your house that are designed for a service in a home, a service of mourning in a home. A couple of things about Shiva besides that. It's important to know that it's not a party. It's not a wake. It's not a let's get drunk and try to distract the mourner. It is very much about focusing on the loss, and on the person. And so there's a brief evening service, at the end of which you have actually, the way we do it here is before you say the mourner's Kaddish, there's a space for what I call a listening session. It's when first everybody's quiet and waits to see if the mourners want to speak and what they want to say about the person, about their relationship with the person, about their lives, about what this death means and how it's going to have repercussions, whatever they need to say. Some people, generally a mourner is a little bit like the ancient mariner, grabbing every stranger and telling their tale. You've got to talk. And so this moment, the listening session, provides an opportunity for people to actually take in what is coming from the mourners, and for the mourner to be able to just tell their tale. Maybe they'll want to tell you about how this person died again and again and again, or maybe they'll want to tell you about what they remember of their childhood, or whatever it may be. But this is their time to talk. Generally, if you're going to have a service and you're going to say Kaddish, you have to have a minyan, that is 10 Jews. We do make that somewhat elastic in cases where there's an interfaith family or there are not that many Jewish people in their circle. And some of us who are on the more liberal end of the spectrum will just consider that your close circle is your minyan. And we don't ask people, are you Jewish? And sometimes we do, depending on the needs of the family. Many families are more observant and will want what they grew up with and think of as the proper Jewish way to do things. So that's, and if you don't have enough people to make a minyan, we have volunteers who will show up and be part of, and be silent if you don't know them, but they will be there to say Amen and to do what they have to do in the service and give you the space to have a Shiva. The listening session is really important. It allows the mourners to reminisce about the deceased. It allows them, it also very important, at least I found this very, very powerful, was hearing from other people their reflections of the people I had lost, and building a picture that was larger than what I knew. Oh, really? My father did that? Oh, wow. And my mother said that? It's important. And I recommend it, actually, as a very, very healing tool. We also, the same thing applies with a burial, about the minyan, that again, if a more observant officiant is there, there will be 10 Jews, and we have volunteers who can make that quota for you. And then there are lay leaders who will say, your friends and supporters and children and spouse or whatever are your minyan. And we're not asking whether they're Jewish or not. The point is they've showed up. They've showed up for the mourner and in honor of the one who has died. And that is what it's all about. It's about community supporting people in time of need. And we have lots of structures for that. The other thing that we do is we have a marvelous team of people who will provide meals during the week of mourning if the family is just too, either not supported by close friends and probably are too exhausted to think about that. And it's customary when you go to a Shiva house to bring some food. One custom is to bring round foods because that symbolizes the wholeness of life. Hard-boiled eggs, bagels, oranges, whatever is round. And it doesn't have to be. It's not a rule. It's not hard and fast. Oh, I'm losing my natalis. I'm so cold. It's weird. And we can supply meals. And the other thing we can do is we can just check in. And it's a very important thing to do. If you happen to know a person who is bereft, it's a wonderful thing to call them, like maybe once a week for a while, just to, how are you doing? Is there anything I can do? Would you like to go for a walk? Whatever. It's really important to, you know, we don't wear black armbands, but it's a way, fragile. Handle with care. This person has been through something very hard, and they need to be handled tenderly. So that's one of the things we do. The funeral coordinator will help organize all of these things, the meals, the people for the Shiva, people to help out in a number of ways, and will also generally make follow-up calls during at least the first month, depending on the state of the person. They may not want any more contact, or they may really relish it and need it for longer than a week or a month. And then the next stage is at the end of about a year. Generally, this is not law, but it's a custom that's about 11 months after the time of the death. The marker, and this is only American, by the way. This is a homegrown American custom. In Israel, there's no such thing as waiting 11 months. The marker goes up right away on a grave. At least my cousins did. But they're secular, you're right. Maybe more traditional people do wait, but it's important, though, to have some moment when you come back to the grave after some significant length of time. That's why we make it about a year. And you recognize that you're not in the same place you were the last time you were there. And it's a very important stage in your own mourning that you do lighten up after time. It's amazing how this unbearable grief eases with time. And I find it very psychologically wise to have that experience because you recognize your own transition. And I want to mention again this planning questionnaire, because I have, as a funeral coordinator, I have been in situations where families were feuding after the death about decisions. And it's really nice to know what Mama really would have wanted, rather than to be speculating or coming from your own set of prejudices. But it's really, what does the person who is going to die want to have done for themselves after they've died? You know, and we're all going to die, so what do we want from, in the way of ritual? What do we not want? It's just very important to think about those things, and it makes it so much easier for survivors, and don't need to have conflict at a time that people can get really crazy in grief. It happened in my own family, so I know, but it's very good to have as many things pre-decided as possible so that there are the fewest opportunities for conflict at a time when everybody's emotions are raw. Okay. Treasure Each Day is this booklet that is pretty much a step-by-step, and I highly recommend reading it now, while I assume nobody in this room is in the depths of bereavement, and prepare, understand what the steps will be when the time comes. It's sort of like many years ago, someone was offering me a Black Panther newspaper on the street corner and said, "Find out what's happening before it happens to you." And I highly recommend doing that with something as inevitable as one's own death. This is not something we can run away from, because it'll catch you. This questionnaire saves indecision and conflict. It avoids both of those within the family or community group that's organizing. Yes, I see a hand, and please know that I'm going to repeat your question for the YouTube audience. I don't know if Gary brought more than one questionnaire tonight, but we do have the booklet and the and the explanatory little paragraphs on Chevra Kadisha. So the question was, did we have questionnaires here tonight? And Gary, do we have questionnaires here tonight?
I think there are a bunch of them back there. They're supposed to be.
Well, I didn't see any, but, oh, okay, there are, good. Yes, we do have them, great. And treasure each day, and yes, good. Any other questions? Okay, so a couple of other things. I was saying we don't pretty things up. I'll be a little bit more specific. Have any of you been to a Jewish funeral via Temple Beth Israel lately? One. Okay. Two. Did anybody notice that we actually bury our own dead? It is a custom in Jewish tradition that we bury our own dead, and there's a symbolic, everybody doing a shovel or two or three, depending on what your superstition is, and shovelful. And also, there's a custom, and it's very important, it's a fantastic thing to do when you're grieving, to actually fully fill the grave with earth yourself. And you're putting your body into something at a time when your emotions are all over the place, and it really helps ground you, and it makes you feel as if you're doing something very loving for this person, but it's very stark, because that first shovelful hitting the coffin, which is not entirely hollow, but has hollow space in it, and there's a loud thump, it's very stark, it's very real, and it's very necessary. And the absence of flowers is also important because we are not celebrating anything. We don't use in Judaism the phrase celebration of life, ever. Some Jews do because they don't know that it's not traditional, but that is really a very Christian idea with the notion of going to heaven and all that we don't have and we don't use. We accept it, it's hard, but it's also part of life. Nothing that flowers, sprouts, is born is going to live forever. And we are part of the chain of life. We're part of nature. And this is the inevitable result of having been given the gift of life, is that one day you can't handle it anymore, and you're not able to sustain your life, and you are dead. I mean, So it's very, very realistic and very helpful because it helps you move on quickly. Not quickly, but it helps you move on from disbelief to beginning to accept this loss. Yes, Barbara. It depends on the rabbi. The question was, will a rabbi bury a suicide? And the answer is, it depends on the rabbi. I don't know the position of our current rabbi. I know that Rabbi Kinberg of blessed memory and Rabbi Yitz were very compassionate in that area and would not refuse to. Sometimes, in the early days, when our congregation was still in the conservative movement, suicides were buried on the edge of the Jewish section rather than in the middle. But I would be surprised if that prejudice still existed, but I really can't speak for rabbis. I mean, if I were doing it as a lay leader, I would absolutely honor that dead in the same way. It's a tricky issue, though, because, suicide's very explosive emotionally. Any other questions? Everybody ready? Yes, Bryna. A practical question.
My father is on the East Coast. We have a burial plot for him
Here.
And I'm just wondering if he died. So he's very old. He's not so ill right now. And he's on the East Coast because his wife is ill and is on the East Coast. I'll be on the East Coast for 3 months in the fall, so I would be able to fly back, presumably with his body. But I'm just wondering how this would work.
Okay, what do you do if...
What I would do, that is what you might do, that is my calling the synagogue at that point presents you with a difficult situation, so I'm just trying to understand it
Okay,
ahead
so
of time.
Brian is asking about having someone die on the other side of the world or the other side of the country, and having a space for them to be buried here, where you live, where the mourners would live. And what do you do? Well, it gets expensive, but it's feasible. You'd have to have a funeral home involved on wherever the person died, and a funeral home involved here to receive it. But there are special caskets that are made for shipping bodies, and they... I think it's dry ice, yeah. And they're sealed, hugely sealed for the sake of everybody who has to handle them. And then they can be shipped here, and then everything can take place as normal. But it is a very expensive proposition, just warning you.
And what alternatives would you recommend?
The question was, what alternatives would I recommend? I'm not sure off the cuff that I have a recommendation. I guess you'd have to think through what would the options be. Not having them buried here, burying them there, and going there instead to do the burial, or hoping that you could move them here before they died so that that would not be the case. But in the end, those are the other thing is, if you're not deeply committed to Jewish tradition and you would be comfortable with cremation, you could cremate them where they were, and then the ashes would be easier to transport and could be buried here. So various choices, but I honestly, this is really more a funeral director at a funeral home question, because they know the ins and outs of all that more than... It's not really my area of expertise. Any more questions about anything? Barbara?
It sounds like this volunteer funeral coordinator is a very complicated task. Could you talk a little bit about the training?
The training, yeah. Did you want to say something to that? Oh, Barbara's question is, funeral coordinator sounds like a heck of a complicated task. For a volunteer, and what do we have to say about that? Did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I was going to say something about that. The funeral coordinator has it's actually a difficult task, because you're coordinating, first of all, a family in grieving. You're coordinating a synagogue with its employees and its space and its requirements of the resource. Then you have the funeral home and their employees and their scheduling. Then you have the cemetery with their restrictions around when they can bury, who can do this. And so it's a real juggling act, and that's really, I think, where the funeral coordinator, it's one of the areas they really shine. And but I can say that although sometimes it's difficult, it always works out. They get buried, yeah, it always works out. To the subject of bodies are shipped regularly, flown from one place to another. We could not have a body flown into Eugene when we didn't have larger airplanes. The smallest airplane that can do it is a 737, and when we didn't have that service, we couldn't have bodies flown in or out. But now we can, and it's done quite regularly. It is expensive, but that is handled very well with the one funeral home to the next funeral home.
And the committee then, even if it's taking a little bit longer, you would still perform the ritual?
That depends. Sometimes they will ask before the body is transported to have the tahara done there in another place if there is a Chevra Kadisha, and this is a part of the coordination. Sometimes they will. We've done tahara here for bodies before they were shipped, and so that's part of the negotiation. Has to do with various things. Yeah.
Sort of answered my question, but I'm wondering if you can ship bodies, if there's no requirement to be embalmed,
No.
to be shipped somewhere else over days or whatever.
Not now, not now. There used to be, I think. Yeah. Sure.
Is the mate always buried in a casket here in Virginia?
That's a good question. And the question is the body, the Met, always buried in a coffin? And there are now some, you can be buried in a shroud. And in fact, we did a burial for a rabbi here in a beautiful shroud that was made especially for that. And there are now green burials that are not inexpensive, but they're very beautifully done, usually a kind of a willow wicker. So you do not have to have a casket in some cemeteries. I think Masonic Cemetery, I know you do not have to have a casket for. Max.
So I'm on the burial committee for the synagogue in Portland. We do what we call green burials.
Yeah.
Green burials are basically you dig a hole and the person put in the basket. And one of the comments that we've had, the problem we've had with it, or huge problems thinking about it, was the fact that when the body decomposes, obviously there's going to be a hole in the ground. So there's always that idea of filling back up and taking care of that situation type of thing. What I would like, if you could, and not to make humor out of the whole thing, I would like to hear some of the traditions, some of the funny things that people think about coming up with funerals as to, washing their hands or what kind of the old traditions that used to be around.
Go ahead.
You want to get the mic back? Max was asking about what are some of the old traditions, and there is a custom when you return from the cemetery. There is a very old in the Torah notion that one is polluted by contact with the dead. You become unclean. We don't actually believe that, but in honor and memory of that concept from which all of this descends, all of our ideas date back a very, very long time and have evolved enormously. But in honor of that, when you return from the cemetery, the people who are doing the meal of consolation will also place a pitcher of water and some hand towels before the door of the house so that you wash your hands. And you can think of that as washing away the pollution of the dead, or you can think about that as re-entering your home. And you will have probably been handling the shovel. You may be dirty, too. You could clean up. So that's one tradition. And the idea of burying our own dead is another one, which I think is very, very surprising to people who haven't seen it before, but very, very positive for those who are engaged in it. There's a notion in Judaism of chesed shel emet, true loving kindness, and that act is in that category because you are doing something for someone who will never thank you, not return the favor. It's purely a gift, and we're all going to need it. So it's a kind of good investment. A question came from earlier in writing about what about an interfaith couple that wants to be buried together or nearby? Well, you're talking to TBI in the 21st century. We have 2 cemeteries in which interfaith families who are part of our community may be buried together. There are certain restrictions, no symbols of another religion on the gravestone. So if somebody is a very deeply believing something else and want to have symbols on their gravestone, they cannot be buried in the Jewish section. But if they're a fellow traveler, not to hark back to McCarthy or anything, but someone who is walking in companionship with the Jewish partner in the Jewish community, and is willing to just have their name and their dates on there and maybe a quotation or something, but no non-Jewish religious symbols, they are more than welcome in the Masonic cemetery, which has very few spaces left. Get them while you can. And in our wonderful new cemetery at West Lawn, that is permitted. We did have a relationship with another cemetery for many years, which is almost filled up, which was founded by our congregation in the 50s when we were part of the conservative movement and people were of a very different mindset from today, and that was restricted to Jews only. But we don't actually use that cemetery very much anymore because it's easier to work with the other two. And the third, it's Rest Haven Cemetery on Willamette with the wavy brick wall, yeah. Any other questions? Anybody ever been to a Shiva? Let me see who's been to a Shiva in this room. Oh, more than half. Great. Just about. So you have some idea. But I've been to Shiva in different places. My husband's family is from the Chicago suburbs, and it's a wake. It's a cocktail party. Oh, I'm so happy to see you, and all the food, and everybody's eating. It is customary not to eat the food in a Shiva house, which is brought for the mourners. It's not a party. You're not invited to come and have a snack. You're invited to come and be supportive, help make a minyan, help be there to show your kind caring, but not to be indulged. It's customary when people come to your home for Shiva, you don't have to greet them, and you certainly don't entertain them. You are there to be comforted, and you accept this gift because you know that it's what we do for each other.
Ken has a question.
Another question, yes, Ken.
This is completely different if instead of doing Shiva, you're doing a memorial or a celebration of a person's life. That's more, my experience is that's more party-like.
Yeah, but we don't. We don't do. A memorial service is not a party the way we do it. It's pretty much like a funeral, except that it happens after the burial or cremation. It's a lot of the same liturgy. So we don't have and we don't do a celebration of life. That's just not what our liturgy dictates. The words we use are words of comfort and acceptance, but not of whoopee. And in fact, that phrase actually grates on my ear when I hear it, because it is just, people have to be educated away from that notion if they want to work with TBI, because that is just not how we do it. Yes, Oriana.
Does our community have any experience of burials where someone has had land out in the county but outside of Eugene and wanted to be buried on property where they've been given permission to be buried there?
Oriana's question is about a burial on private land, and I'm going to take this to Judith and let her answer that, because I know she's been to one.
So my family, my in-laws had land, and we sanctified the land. We made a funeral, we made a burial space. We walked the land 7 times, and we said blessings and sang songs and dealt with the city also, and sanctified that land. And sanctified that land. So what I was saying is that my in-laws had private land, and we walked the land 7 times and sanctified the land. And then that has 3 members of a family who are buried there now. But you do need permission. You need to make that request. But it's possible.
Do you know the answer?
My understanding is that it actually is, if you sanctify a cemetery on private land, it is attached to your deed, to the land. Attached to the deed, your deed. So the actual cemetery is plotted on the tax maps.
And what if it's not sanctified?
if you just put it in the ground, then it's in the ground. I don't know. It's not legal, but if it's done properly and legally, it has to be done through the land maps and the state of Oregon or county. Yes, Barbara.
Still, I mean, people still cover mirrors and only sit on hard surfaces and not wear leather shoes. Is all that still?
Barbara's asking about some of the more traditional customs related to Shiva. Sitting on low stools, covering the mirrors. You're not supposed to wash or put on makeup or comb your hair or be concerned with your appearance. There are people who may find that comforting, that may remind them of their families, and they may do that. We won't forbid that, but we do not mandate that. It's not we don't expect that everyone will follow Orthodox custom. Yeah, hard benches. Okay, in Orthodox communities, the rabbi will tear your clothes for you. And modern people here generally don't do that, but the rabbi will supply a little black ribbon on a pin that is cut just before the funeral so that it symbolizes King David hearing the news of the death of his beloved son Absalom, and rending his clothes. And so that's, again, going back to Bible, we aren't all in that place. But some people, I've seen it at a funeral or two from TBI where a relative will want their shirt cut or whatever. And it's entirely a personal choice, all these things. And that's what we are in 21st century TBI Eugene, that we have a great variety of need and belief and relationship to the tradition. And we try to honor everybody where they are and make this work for them within their universe, up to obviously certain boundaries, but they're pretty elastic for the most part. In that we have people who can substitute for someone who will not do X or Y. We have other people who will, because we understand that the main goal here of being a Chevra Kadisha is to support the mourners. And it's a stony path they have to walk, and they do need company. Or I should say, we have to walk, and we do need company.
There are just a couple of things I'd like to add to what Joan said, and then maybe if there are no other questions, we'll bring it to an end. The question, I wanted to add something about Shmira, and I covered it last week. I participated in I was coordinating one funeral where the family wanted very much to be able to do some form of Shmira. And the West Lawn Cemetery, Musgrove's funeral home, cooperated as best they could with the people. And there are legal restrictions around insurance and employees in the space. And as Joan pointed out, it's not like you're talking to a refrigerator if you're in front of the body. But it worked out extremely well, and the funeral home was very cooperative, and it was very meaningful for the family. They were able to go and be with the body for periods of time, not 24 hours, 48 hours, but something can be done with some of the funeral homes. I did want to mention also that we have a Chevra Kadisha fund at Temple Beth Israel, and it's a good fund to make donations to if someone's inclined. It covers costs of the shrouds, which are actually expensive to make, and other expenses that we have a fair number around taking care of what we do. And the other thing is we provide resources and help with indigent burials, and that's where the resources come from. So I just wanted to add that to what the whole picture is.
Right, and we did have a man die in prison, a Jewish man die in prison, destitute, and the money had to be found for everything, for a coffin and a burial plot and so forth. So it's an expensive proposition when that happens, and that's what these resources are for. They're never used unwisely. It's also a nice thing to do in the event of a death of someone you know, someone close to you, because also we encourage any tzedakah. It doesn't have to be to, we're not here to try to raise money for Chevra Kadisha tonight. It would be great, but that's not our purpose. It's tzedakah writ large, even, to anything, to the Red Cross, whatever it might be that would have been close to that person's heart or to your relationship with that person. Maybe you met volunteering somewhere, whatever. It's just a very cleansing thing to do, because you're taking your sorrow and you're doing something positive with it. Just wanted to say that. Any more questions before we wrap up tonight?
Someone would like to know how they find out more about volunteering.
These are questions from the chat. Great. How to find out more about volunteering? Call you? Call you is the question?
Yes.
All right. Gary is standing in as chair for Chevra Kadisha at the moment, and so you can call the synagogue and ask to have them connect you to him. He'll give you his number if you don't have it. If you have a directory, Gary's last name is Tepfer, T-E-P-F-E-R. You can find him, or you can just call and say, I want to talk to the chair of the committee, and they'll connect you.
And just let me fill in, I can give you just a few details. We have several different groups. We have a group of people that provide meals. We have a group of people that come to make minions for services. We have people that help make minions for burials, and we have people that do funeral coordinating, the sewing of shrouds. And so there are a range of different things, and then there's funeral coordination for some people. And there's also tahara. So those are all things that people volunteer to do. We're all volunteers, and some take more training and some take less, but all of those things, that's our job really, is to train new people. And to be honest, we need new people in our group. None of us will be around forever, so we're always looking for new people. And with that, I'll say thanks to everyone for coming, and good night.
And live and be well.